It's almost like we're in like a Volkswagen Polo driving along, and we need the funding to turn that into a really nice Mercedes. But at the same time, we're trying to drive along this Polo. We need to be able to actually like keep the car together. Otherwise, nobody's going to invest in it to make it into Mercedes. But you can't do both. You can't be trying to get the investment for the Mercedes and drive the Polo at the same time.
The insanity of starting up your own business.
Every founder has a whole set of resources at their hand, but if you had a founder's toolkit, what would be the tools that you'd have in there?
The first one is a bullshit detector.
The fact that you're doing things that haven't been done before.
People are everything.
If you were to write a book, what would be its title?
To paraphrase Bill Clinton, it would be "It's the people, stupid."
The time that you want to give up is the time when it's most important not to give up.
Welcome everyone, my name is Ross Tuffee and this is Founder.scot, a series of conversations where I invite founders to share their insights, learnings and experiences of founding a business with me and of course with you. So if you're a founder yourself or are thinking about building a product or company or simply want to understand more about the roller coaster you might ride when starting or scaling a business, stay tuned. Hopefully over the next few minutes we'll have something that will help you on your journey. I'm new to podcasting, and so I'm treating Founder.scot as a new technology product. This means that what you'll see over the first few episodes is our first release, or minimum viable product, MVP. It won't be perfect, or indeed the finished article, but hopefully over the coming weeks you'll be generous enough to tell us what you think, the good, the bad and the ugly, and maybe tell us more about what you want to see and how you'd like to see it. Please put your comments in the chat below, and we really welcome all feedback so we can ultimately deliver to you what you want. I'm delighted to have with me Euan Cameron and Andrew Wood, aka Woody, the co-founders of Willo, a solution that makes recruiting staff really easy and highly effective. More on that later. In this episode, as well as understanding Euan and Woody's founding journey, we cover a few interesting topics that many founders find themselves dealing with, including: is there an advantage to co-founding a company over solo founding? How do you take your idea and develop it into a product? And the importance of establishing a robust culture early in your founding journey. This intro was recorded a little after the original recording. That's because we've been working on how best to present the incredibly valuable insights that my guests generously provide. Bear with us, our ultimate aim is to provide you with a sub 20-minute episode stuffed full of useful hints and tips to help you on your journey. We will get there, and like all great products, our offering will evolve to meet your needs. But as any product developer knows, that takes time, iteration, and lots of user feedback. Right, let's get on with it. Euan and Woody, guys, it's great to have you here. Thank you for taking time out of your business to share your thoughts with us. Can we start by talking about what you did before you founded Willo?
Sure. Okay. So my life before Willo was working in more corporate jobs in larger companies. So I previously worked in a company in Scotland with about 1,000 employees, and I was working in their marketing department. So quite different from where we are today. But throughout the 10 years that I actually worked there, I learned a lot, I suppose, about day-to-day running of businesses, and really enjoyed actually learning about how business works. Previously went to Glasgow University, 10 years working in a corporate organization, and then more recently started up my own digital marketing agency off the back of that. So spent 2 years running my own agency, helping smaller organizations, so typically like startups and SMEs in the D2C space, with the development of their digital marketing campaigns, and actually setting up the whole digital marketing strategy for D2Cs, and typically in London, that just received maybe seed or pre-seed investment. And then fast forwarded to today and started Willo 2 years ago. So
let's just quickly touch on that. So there's a corporate bit, and then there was a youth. So this is your second rodeo, as they say, or whatever the phrase is. So you founded something before. So is there any sort of bits out of that corporate bit or that first time founding piece that you picked up? Or you
so I
found
guess
useful in the founding of Willo?
yeah, good point. So I guess there was a bit I omitted there, which was in that corporate job. Towards the end of that corporate 10 years, I also started up a business inside that corporate. So we branched out and started up a startup within that corporate, which was my first true exposure to a startup, I suppose. That business was called Car Money, and that was an online car finance business. And that, I suppose, that was my first exposure to what a true startup was like. With literally starting from nothing. So it was just me sitting in a room with some desks and no money coming in, and a bunch of phones, and we obviously I quickly realized that it was hard, I suppose, was the first learning. So learned quite quickly that it was pretty tough, and the days were quite long, but also the sort of the change from being in this corporate to being in this startup was that the highs were much higher. So there was incredibly fun, days. You get to the end of a day, and you'd done some amazing things that you just wouldn't have had exposure to in a traditional corporate. Right. We, for example, would maybe have won a massive deal or launched a website, for example, having previously not had a website, or hired, 3 or 4 amazing staff that all turned up on the first day and actually all were just amazing on the first day. There was like huge wins that you sort of realized that you got. So although there was lots of hard parts, there was lots of really, really positive highs as well.
A bit of that roller coaster. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. The kind of, I guess, in a corporate job, you kind of go like that. Like the good days are good and the bad days are bad, but they're not really either. The good days are not really, really, really good, and the bad days are never really that bad because you're protected by this big corporate kind of bubble where nothing's really going to go that wrong on your watch. Whereas in the startup, the graph tends to be a bit more like that, and it tends to be a bit more like this to start with as well, where there's a lot of harder stuff, and then it starts to fluctuate a lot more. And my second company, I guess it was true again. I sat my first couple of days at my desk, first couple of weeks probably at my desk in this exact seat, and I was like, holy shit, what do I do now? Like, where do the companies come from? Where do the clients come from? It's just literally me. I remember saying to Woody as well, I was like, I don't really know what I'm supposed to be doing. Like, it feels like I should be doing stuff, but I'm not really sure what I'm supposed to be doing. And it was like, you could just sit here. I could just sit here and almost like watch the tumbleweed outside. But then, and then I realized it was all on me. I had to do it all again. And if I didn't start emailing and picking up the phone, no one else was going to do it. So that was quite a stark realization again, that it's quite lonely, I suppose, is the learning there. Like, it is just kind of you sitting on your chair. If you don't actually do something about it, no one else is.
Is that loneliness? Sorry to interrupt there, but that was when you founded your own company. Did that influence the decision to co-found or set up when you set up Willo, sort of thing, between you?
Really good question, 100%. So in the previous 2 startups, Car Money and then my own marketing agency, it was very lonely because you just didn't have anyone to really bounce ideas off. And you also, even though I had a team in Car Money, they weren't the type of team that you were going to share a lot of the kind of the grueling stuff with. You wanted to motivate and be positive, and it wasn't really that you could share a lot of the crap with them. So yeah, starting Willo, it was a conscious decision to actually start with somebody that I could work with and I wanted to work with, and that was obviously why.
Well, that's what we thought at the time, anyway. Yeah.
Yeah, I suppose that was in hindsight.
So Woody would do.
Yeah.
So
50-50 chance.
So Woody, the conversation you pick up here. So just prior to setting up Willo, what was it what were you doing?
Prior to Willo, I had the same job straight out of university for 11 years. So I was basically a sales bloke for a well-known graduate sales recruitment company called Pareto, which a lot of tech companies use for recruitment. And before that, I was a giant mouse at a kids' theme park, and that's pretty much my career history before founding a business. And I was wondering why people weren't making me CEO straight away. So yeah, and I always had this vision of being a business owner, and my goal was always 35 to be a business owner. So I used to write down these ideas every day, and I'd come up with crazy stuff. And sometimes I wish I'd gone with just put 10 grand into skip hire. That'll do. Start a business in that. But I'd write down all these crazy ideas, and then Euan started his kind of entrepreneurial journey, and obviously we're friends, sort of once removed through my wife, and I watched him start to generate this idea and decided it was also a great idea, and that Euan and I get on well. We have a similar kind of business ethos as well, and definitely similar ambitions too. So all of that kind of lined up, and then middle of the pandemic, I just left my job.
As you do.
Yeah.
It's So that kind of coming together. That without being too frivolous around in the middle of the pandemic, left my job. That's a pretty big decision to make for the two of you to set up a business in the middle of the pandemic, or certainly at the start of it there. What was it that drove you to start the business, or was it the idea that drove you to start the business? You've already said, "Oh, I knew I'd be a business founder, Woody, by 35." By the way, how old are you now?
I'm just 34. Thanks for reminding me.
Okay, so you've achieved that goal in life. Congratulations,
yeah.
Well done. So the kind of that idea, was it the idea that drove the business, or was it the fact you wanted to be running a business?
To answer the first part, and then I'll hand to Euan. But the first part, it's not a pandemic business. We started the business in 2018, talking about it and ideation and stuff like that. For me, it was very much, I saw Euan trying out this idea that he had about one-way video interviewing. I knew I wanted to be a business owner, and I just had a really great full body decision, as it's called, where everything told me that I should jump into this with Euan, and we should try and make it work together. So mine was kind of fueled by the fact that Euan already had a good idea that I totally agreed with, and he was a good guy, and he was successful, and our skills and expertise complement each other, and therefore it was a really natural decision for me to kind of get involved in it. For Euan, it's probably a bit different, I guess, and I know Euan started lots of different stuff. So,
well, that's good. I think as well, it's worth caveating for people that are watching this, that because it might be a bit off-putting to others to think about co-founders, but Woody and I weren't like friends as such, where we were like acquaintances more than anything else. So when we actually came together to work on this together, it was quite a logical kind of business decision, rather than just like, "Oh, you're a good mate, let's start a business together." I think it's worth mentioning that, because we actually, we went through the motions of figuring out whether this was the right partnership. It wasn't just like the nearest person that I could find, or vice versa, that we just came together on. I think that's important. You don't need to be friends either to start a business like this.
Yeah, I co-founded with my brother-in-law, and actually I remember having a conversation at a conference we went to, which was talking about founding, and they said, never found with family members. And I said, actually, I think that's a load of rubbish. I think that if you know somebody that well, and you can work with them, I think, we weren't clearly living in the same house as my brother-in-law, so at the end of the day we went home to separate houses, but I knew Paul really, really well, and I knew very much that his skills complemented mine, as you've just said. So that complementary skills thing was really important. And I basically said, actually, I think it's a load of rubbish you don't found with family members, somebody you know really well. So I think there's probably on both sides, you kind of, it might not be somebody you know that well, but there's a complementary thing that you can explore, versus, actually, I knew him anyway. I knew he was integral, driven, talented chap, sort of thing. So, but anyway,
I think the key to it is actually understanding what they are, what the person is like in a work context, really. Because if you focus on the fact that they're your favourite family member, then that's probably the wrong reason. But if you focus on the fact that you know that they're really passionate about the job they have and they've got X, Y, Z skills and actually they make really mature business decisions and they can distance family from work and stuff like that, that's what you should be looking at more than anything.
You're right.
Yeah, that's definitely that's the logical part, I suppose, that I was talking about. The decision-making process was very logical and quite cold, actually, for us both. But I guess to talk about the idea and how we got here, like Woody said, it was actually 2018. So 2016, I threw together a wireframe on holiday, much to my girlfriend's frustration. I basically spent like every lunch on holiday designing wireframes. Didn't really come to anything, but I designed it anyway and then stuck it in this massive folder of business ideas, like a graveyard that will never come to life. And then 2 years later, 2018, decided there's something here, let's revive that idea. And spent 2018, 2019, while running the agency that I'd started, just mulling this idea over in the back of my mind and kind of de-risking the idea. So going through all of the different pieces of the puzzle to make sure that it was the right thing to do. I'm quite an analytical person, so although I say yes to a lot of stuff, I tend to have done the homework like already before I say yes. And that was particularly true with Willo as well. I kind of, although I knew there was something there, I didn't just like jump 2 feet into it. Although I would like to say that I did, I didn't. I spent like 2 years mulling it over and going through all the different, outcomes and trying to figure out, how do we fund this? How do we do like a really, really cheap MVP to test it? And just speaking to loads of people as well. So like lots of different advisors, people in different industries. I made lots of friends in different, recruitment businesses, for example, tech companies, just floating the idea, maybe not explicitly even talking about the idea, but talking about bits of the idea, just to really stress test it. And I think that was maybe not traditional way of doing things, but it made sense to me to go through the motions and really figure it out for myself.
Is that before Woody joined you, Euan? So that idea, you went through a whole load of things like de-risk the idea. You're very analytical, look at the data, talk to people, cheap MVP. Is that as just before Woody joined you? Is that?
Yeah, so this was like a more like just a really conceptual R&D kind of hobby almost. Like, like I said, I used to when I go on holiday, I would literally be doing stuff related to this idea. It wasn't allocated time during my day. I wasn't like, 3 hours a day researching Willo or anything, because I knew that I had to run the agency. It was more just kind of a hobby, wanting to see what this was all about. And, I would do things like even, just place random sales calls to competitors in the space already and pretend I was wanting to buy their software and things, just bits and pieces. And I eventually collected a massive folder and had enough information to then actually meet up with Woody and say, this looks like a fully formed idea. Will we try and make something of it, basically? And I think that process didn't need to take 2 years, but I don't think it needed to take 2 years, but it was just the way that I had done it, the way it was sort of slotted in around other things that were going on in my life. It just ended up taking a long time.
I was going to say that these things, I mean, this idea that founding a company is often in series is kind of not necessarily true. Many founders will be doing a full-time job, like you guys, the idea is brewing in the background. You're doing your I'm going to say you're doing your 9 to 5, but I would imagine it wasn't just a 9 to 5. You guys, you were working. I don't see you as 9 to 5 people in any job in that sense. And then you've got to then think about the idea, doing the research, making the calls, etc. And that's but I guess there is a big jump from being employed to not being employed. How have you both found that, Woody? Have you found that jump across to not being employed by somebody else? Is that significant, or no? It's just something that happens.
It's a very interesting question. I mean, look, I've learnt more in however long I've been in the business, a year in actual full-time Willo, than 11 years at my previous employer. So that in itself is a little bit scary, because you think about all the stuff that I didn't know before, and I was just working very hard at a very, stay in your lane kind of sales role. I think actually it can be. I'm lucky because Euan, I think, has had roles with more autonomy and more scope before, so I've learned a lot from Euan in that regard. But actually, it's quite liberating knowing that the consequence of your decisions, you can absolutely own them, and say that I've made this decision, and this is where we're going, and this is what's happening, and it's down to me or us in some scenarios, and I can hold myself 100% accountable to it. Whereas in a corporate business, there's a hierarchy, and quite often it's actually, rather than people taking accountability, it's finding blame in a lot of businesses, which I really disliked. But I did as well as a manager. I would try and find blame and all of that stuff, because that was, kind of the culture. And actually now it's like I say, it's daunting. We've got to pay the payroll. When are we going to run out of money? When do we need more money, etc. Is a big pressure, but at the same time, it is liberating, I think.
And you obviously shifted from that corporate role, which is an employed role, into your own agency. So you made that jump. Is that, you echo that, or is there anything else you want to add to that kind of from being employed to not being employed, or employing others even, in that sense?
Here's an interesting fact for you then. So I was okay with the decision from jumping, because I'd done maybe I had about 6 months worth of savings, and I'd kind of just secretly stashed that in a bank account before I made the jump. So I was okay with it, but everyone else around me was not okay with it. So when I told my family, for example, they were pretty, actually not like angry or disappointed or anything, but they weren't supportive necessarily. They were like, "How are you going to pay for that?" Because I just moved house actually as well. So I just bought my first house.
Yeah.
So I bought my first house in the November, and then quit my job in December. So I basically paid for 1 month's mortgage, and then decided to go on my own. And when I told my family weren't very impressed, but also my partner wasn't very impressed, and they were all, I guess, just concerned about how I was going to pay for things, which so I was fine with it, but everyone else around me wasn't, which made it a little bit more unpleasant, I suppose.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. I remember when I set up Dogfish, my wife at the time, she said to me, "You've got 9 months to make this work, or you need to go and get a proper job."
Yeah.
And I was like, I was determined to set Dogfish up at that time and to make it work. And actually, in month 9, we landed 2 contracts, so that was cool. But I wish I'd started. Actually, funny enough, that overlap, I didn't do the overlap. I had a corporate job, and then I actually took a month or 2 off in the summer, so I was made redundant and whatever. And then I went, now I'm going to really focus on it. I wish I'd started earlier, because I think month 9 would have been, say, month 6 at that point or something like that. So, but it is interesting. You're not just making the decision for you; you're making the decision for those that are your nearest and dearest, I suppose. So
it's worth trying to looking back. It's worth trying to think about how you maybe address those conversations earlier on. 'Cause I didn't really discuss it with anyone. I kind of sprung it on everyone.
I absolutely had the discussion. So mine was like totally planned out. I'll only do this if you support me, because I don't need the stress of you not supporting me, basically.
Yeah.
So, 2 years away from leaving my job, I was literally like, I'm going to leave my job eventually. I'm going to keep you updated as when I'm going to leave my job. We're going to save as much as we possibly can and live like hermit crabs. If at any point you are not supporting me, you need to let me know, because then I have to change, because it's not fair on you, and it's not fair on me, it's not fair on you, all of that stuff. So it was a bit different, I think, for me, because, we had got, the business had got to a point where it was financially viable, a bit more stable. but you were kind of selling your skills as an agency, so it's totally different, right? Because you knew you had those skills, and you probably had massive confidence in yourself to go on and be successful.
Yeah, I think confidence. I mean, the confidence is important as part of it. Belief and purpose, I guess, is part of that. If you don't have confidence and you don't believe in the purpose of what you're trying to do, then I think you probably don't reach that benchmark of I'll do it. But you're right about the whole idea of we need these people around us to support us, and it is really important that is the case, because whilst we might think this idea is fantastic and it's just going to go like a rocket ship, there are those hard times that you mentioned there. So let's talk a little bit about the business, actually, because I think the idea has become a business. The business is growing, etc. And tell us a little bit about it, but also tell us what you really enjoy about being the leaders, the founders of Willo.
I'll kick us off then. So the premise of Willo, I suppose, if we start with the assumption that nobody knows what Willo is a video interviewing platform, and it's all one way or asynchronous. So what that means is that rather than doing an interview where there's an interviewer and then there's an interviewee and they're talking back and forth, the premise of Willo is that you are essentially answering questions on recorded video that somebody then watches back later. And the whole concept came about because the traditional interviewing process for candidates in particular is quite broken. It's, for example, very inflexible from a candidate perspective, but also from a company perspective. You're typically trying to interview a candidate between the hours of 9 to 5. Unless that candidate doesn't have a job, that's quite a stretch for them to even come along. You've got things like, obviously, that it's in an office. You typically are inviting them to an office. You have to travel there. Can't always be accessible, or they might have to travel a long distance, which is not good for time or the environment. And then there's the extra stress that a traditional interview comes with as well. You've got the pressure of sitting in front of somebody that you've never met before, answering questions that you've never had to answer before, and you've got to do that on the spot there and then. So we took all of the things that were broken about an interview and essentially turned it into a virtual environment. So you do the interview on Willo, which is a browser-based platform. You answer questions on video, and the employer watches those videos back in their own time. And it's been going successfully for 2 years now. So we actually just celebrated our 2-year birthday 2 weeks ago, which is insane. Yeah. Well done, us. And
Well done, you.
I didn't even think about it,
Yeah, I know, it just kind of came and went.
Yeah. But you've gone on a long journey since then. So when you started, obviously the two of you with quote no clients. Obviously, you start with So you're up to what sort of how many people are you employing at the moment?
So we have 12 full-time employees, and we are a mixture of employees across Europe, actually. So we decided really, really early on, just because of the distance between Woody and I, that it didn't make sense to have a home as such. So we decided just to hire remotely, and we were going to continue working remotely because neither of us were planning on moving anytime soon.
So that, just to be clear, you live in Scotland and Woody lives not in Scotland.
Yes. Yeah.
Founder.mank. That's me.
Manchester man. So that's interesting. So you've co-founded in separate locations.
Here's an interesting stat for you as well then. So over the past 2 years, we've actually only met up face to face, I think 4 or 5 times. And we started Willo in that period. Not only that, we also raised £1 million of investment. And went full time.
And have you? And how many times have you met the investors?
Once face to face.
Yeah, and that's incredible. I mean, obviously, a lot of that is to do with the last 2 years, etc. However, in your instance, it's not just to do with that, because obviously you are you work in separate locations.
Yeah, regardless of the past 2 years, we would have founded the business in the same way for sure.
Yeah. It was the ethos of the business. If you're promoting virtual recruitment and what it can do, you really have to live it, don't you? So we are basically.
Yeah.
what is it that you like about founding the business? What are those things that you enjoy that are important?
The kind of key thing that I enjoy, Ross, about starting any business is the fact that you're doing things that haven't been done before. So basically forging a way or creating something out of nothing. I think that's the most exciting thing. And it can be really small things like just developing, building a new spreadsheet for doing something, or like, developing a new process for like a team, or, just the smallest things. It's just the fact that you're creating something from nothing, I think is probably the most enjoyable thing. In a traditional corporate job, you tend to inherit a lot of stuff that's already been figured out before you came along. But what's really cool about founding something is that there is nothing to inherit. No one's ever been there before and done that before. So you're starting from scratch, which is actually really, I think, really fun from a personal perspective. I love that.
Okay, cool. Woody, how about you? What is it that you really enjoy, particularly in the context of the company, the business, and its growth, etc.?
Yeah, well, I think the first thing is just the amount of learning that you get done as a founder, and I've got a real thirst for knowledge, and the learning of, like, rather than waiting till it's perfect, just test something out. That whole mantra of basically getting something delivered and then seeing what works, what doesn't work is really, again, it's really empowering, because you basically just go, right, let's just try it. Let's try it. If it doesn't work, we'll do something different. But if it does, great. So I really enjoy that. The other is like being the owners of the culture of the business. So we can really set the tone early for what the company's going to look like in the future. And I always use a terrible analogy, I'm sure, of the business moving from being a car to a taxi to a minibus to a double-decker bus. So you start off in this tiny little car. It's just me and you and talking to each other. He's driving, I'm in the passenger seat. Really easy to see where we're going. I can tell him to turn left. You then move to a taxi. Maybe somebody else is driving it. You've got a couple of people in the back that you've got to turn around to speak to. Then you're in a minibus and you've got to shout to the back of the minibus, and then you're on a double-decker bus, and all of a sudden it's really difficult
running up the stairs
to actually keep the culture going upstairs, right? So that whole idea of creating a culture early that then the people that we have now become our champions of culture in the future, and they're on the upstairs of the double-decker bus. So that's the kind of stuff that excites me. I think sometimes I get ahead of myself, because sometimes you have to actually just do the job and like get on with the hard grind, and culture will sort itself out in the future. But they're the things that I do really enjoy. And then just looking, like February 2020, we got 40 quid from a client, one client that we'd never spoken to, signed up on their own. And at the time we were like, wow, that's amazing. And now it's like, 40 quid, it's a small client, it's not enough really, is it? So it's that comparison in the journey between like where we are now and not forgetting that is really important, actually, like they are still valuable. They were valuable before.
There's some really good points there. I mean, you talked about learning, you talked about culture, and then you talked about the customer, etc. I love your analogy, by the way. I think that's fantastic. We'll talk about books later on and titles of books. I think there's definitely a book to be made there. So. But when you look at culture and its importance and setting it, because nobody else is going to set it apart from you two. That's the bottom line, and the impact of culture on an organisation is worth a lot of money. I mean, I've bored many people in the past by saying that when I left my former company, the first 10 people that left went to incremental salaries of somewhere in the region of 180,000 over a period of 10 months or so. And, so I can, 40 people in the company, 10 people. So, roughly $500,000 it was worth culture. And that's just in cost, because those people could have left and gone and worked elsewhere, anytime. But they chose to stay because they enjoyed working there. And I think there is something about, maintaining staff, motivating staff, sharing the vision and all the rest of it, which I think is really, really, really powerful. And I get the sense from you guys that is core to what you do. So just generally, guys out there, if you want to chat more about the subjects that we've raised in this podcast, or hear about future episodes, future guests, then please join the discussion at Founder.scot. So Founder.scot. You can also follow us on Twitter. Twitter, we're on FounderDotScot. That's Founder.Scot. That's also the same handle for YouTube. And on LinkedIn and on Instagram, we are on Founder.scot. So Founder.scot there. Those links will be posted below. Thank you, Euan. Thank you, Woody. Really appreciate your time, and we'll catch up with you later. Thanks, guys.